V'chisia b'ish chet mishvat moves v'humos. A person who had a transgression which carried the liability of the death penalty, v'humos, and he was put to death. V'saliso solo eitz. He should be displayed on a tree. Meaning, the Mishnah tells us in Sanhedrin, Kolanis koleni tolim, that if a person is put to death through stoning, his remains have to be displayed before he's buried, before sundown. On the day that he's stoned, his remains have to be displayed, and then he's buried. That's for Saliso Solo Eitz. So Rashi explains, what is the juxtaposition of the person who's liable for death penalty to the rebellious son who steals from his parents and he becomes a repeated offender? So initially, the rebellious son was put to death as relatively a child, when he just first entered into adulthood, as we explained, because he was developing an addiction which ultimately would lead to murder. The Torah says better take him out when he's relatively innocent rather than when he's fully liable for the death penalty because he committed murder. What happens if the parents did not heed the Torah and they dismissed it? And as we said, they attributed to its immaturity. It's not an addiction. And ultimately it happened as the Torah said it would happen. Excuse me. And he's put to death. So why was he put to death? Because it was liable for a mishpat movis. Because he deserved to be put to death, because he committed murder. But if his parents would have addressed the problem initially, he would have never committed murder. Shemchosim oviv v'imu olav sofel sheyetze l'tarbas ro. If the parents initially have compassion for him and they don't follow the Torah's good advice, ultimately he's going to take not a good path. V'yavar averes v'yischayev misa bebezdin. He will transgress many sins and be liable for the death penalty. For toliso solo eitz, Rabbeinu Amar Kol Niskolim, he told him, anybody who's deserving of stoning, his remains have to be displayed. V'zeh shenemar ki kilas elokim toloi. We'll see the next pasuk. V'amvoreches Hashem b'skilo. If a person, God forbid, blasphemes God, the liability is also the death penalty, is stoning, and also he has to be displayed. Why must... The Torah says, however, although you must display his remains, lo solin nivloso alo eitz. His remains should not be left displayed on the tree. Ki kovet tikperena bayom ahu. He should be buried on the day that he's killed. Ki kilas l'kim toloi. Because the curse of God or the disgrace of God is being displayed. And you should not contaminate your land, which God is giving you. So there's a famous Rashi over here, which is the Midrash. Excuse me. He must be displayed, but his body must be taken down before the end of the day, because the disgrace of God is being displayed. So Rashi explains, Zilzulu shemelechu, to allow the person to be displayed beyond sundown, it's disgracing the king. Sha'odam osi b'demus yukno. A person is made in the image of Hashem. As it says, when God created Adam, he was made in God's image and form. The Yisrael hein bonov, and the Jewish people are considered his children. Moshel, what is it in Alex? Shnei achim tu'umim, shoyu domim zeh lezeh. Two brothers, they were identical twins. Echod nase melech, one became the king, ve'echod nitfas listios v'nitle, and the other one was captured as a gangster, and he was hanged. Coloroso. So when you see the gangster hanging, what do people say? He's the identical twin of the king. Melech toloi. They say the king is hanging. They don't realize it's the gangster because they're not able to differentiate between the gangster and the king. Tziva melech v'ridu. So the king gave the order, take him down. Kol kloshim nikrosh and hokel v'zilzul. It means the person is belittled, is disgraced. Kilas, kilani klolim retzes. So why must you take the person down? He must be displayed because of what he did. He did something so extreme that he deserves the death penalty, which is the most extreme level of death penalty, which is stoning. However, beyond sundown, he should not, because that's already too much, because that's disgracing the image of God, because the Jew is made in the image of God. Okay? Now it's interesting. There's a whole discussion. A non-Jew, is he b'tzelem Elokim? Is he in the image of God? You'd say, just as it says, Atim kruim odom v'hem lo kruim odom, as based on the Pasuk Yechezkel, that our classification is odom, and the non-Jewish classification is not odom, as we explained many times. The whole concept of spiritual advancement has no relevance to the Jew. So maybe, in addition, just as initially Adam was made b'tzelem Elokim, he had the image of God. So once he ate of the Eitz Hadas, he forfeited that image. And therefore, only the Jew who was instated as the original Adam, we have it, they don't have it. So I remember, interesting story, all the yeshivas in Europe fled at the very beginning of the Holocaust. And if you read about the flight of the Mir Yeshiva, when they fled from the Mir, it was a small town in Poland, and under the order of Chaim Ozer, all the yeshivas in Europe, they came to Vilna. Because Vilna at that time was under the dominion of the Lithuanians. It was not Poland. Hitler, Yimach Shmo, had made a pact with Poland, and therefore, once Poland was under the control of Hitler, Yimach Shmo, they went in and they destroyed all the communities. But Vilna was only the safe haven. So Chaim Ozer had given an order that before they went into Poland, all the yeshivas should go to Vilna. So they left, and they left everything behind. All the svarim, they only took what they were able to take, the few belongings. So my Mashgiach Zech Tzedek V'rocha, he had a sefer that was written by Rav Chaim Vital, who was the Talmud of the Arizal, who recorded all his teachings. The sefer was called Shari Ora, the gates of light. After the war, World War II, the United States government, the Nazis, Yimach Shmo, they had made warehouses of all the various things, artifacts of the Jews, because they wanted to make a museum of a lost people that no longer exist. They became extinct, the Jewish people. And they had warehouses of all the various, the crowns, the breastplates, the silver hands that use on a Sefer Torah, that Sefer Torah in warehouses, because from these various artifacts, they were going to make this museum. They had warehouses with Svarim, and the books went back to the first printings of the Shas, many things they had there. So after JTS, after the war, received the vast majority of a lot of these books, and they had literally containers, which the United States government, the United States Army brought to the United States, and it was given to the Jewish institutions in the United States. As I said, the JTS received the bulk and the most valuable And they were literally antique books that went back to the 1600s, original printings. But the yeshivas, which there weren't that many, they were also received some of these containers. There was a fire in the 80s in the JTS. During that fire, the Jewish theological ceremony, a good part of those books were burnt. It was a fire in JTS. But near Israel, Baltimore, they received a few of these containers. And they have a library. The library is comprised of many of these books that they received. So my mashgiach, Zechariah Levrocha, came to Near Israel in 1947 to become the mashgiach. The Mir Yeshiva came to the United States in about 1945, 46. They landed in San Francisco, and they came to New York, many of the students. And he was the yeshiva, and my yeshiva says to my mashgiach, you could take whatever you want. That before we take the books out of these containers for the yeshiva, you need your own personal books. You have no books. Of course, he fled Europe. He left everything behind. So he's able to take whatever he wants. He says, go to these containers, and whatever you want to take out of that container. So he's going through, and he notices the Shari Ora, this book that was his back in Europe in the Mir, which was written by Rav Chaim Vital. So he sees it, and it's something he was very happy to find, a copy, because his copy was lost in Europe. He opens the copy. Whose name do you think is written in the copy? David Crone. It was his copy that he'd left behind in the Mir. I'm just giving you a story, what happened. So the copy was in the Beis Medrash in Baltimore, and this is the 60s. I open it up, and I see underlined, he underlines, it says that even a non-Jew is B'Tselem Elokim. He has that underlined in the work of Shari Ora of the Rav Chaim Vital, that although the non-Jew was disenfranchised, he was no longer classified as Odom, but in terms of Tselem Elokim, he still retained the Tselem Elokim. That he still retained. Because we're explaining now why the person who's put to death by stoning, why could you not display him beyond sundown? Because Kiles Elokim Tolui. Because the curse of God is hanging. Because since the Jew is Bonim Atem L'Shem Elokechem, you are his child, we reflect his image. It would be a disgrace of God having him displayed. That's the reason. So therefore he has to be taken down. So it seems to be only the Jew. But if we're saying that even the non-Jew is considered Tselem Elokim, but the fact is, of all the death penalties, the death penalty for a non-Jew who violates the 7 Noahide laws is cherev, is dying by sword. It's not stoning. The death penalty in the Beis Din, which is the only person who's liable for stoning, is only the Jew, not the non-Jew. The halacha of displaying the remains of the person who's put to death by the court, that's only skila. Skila only has relevance to the Jew. The death penalty of a non-Jew for all the Shev Mitzvah Bnei Noach, if they violate them, is cherev, is dying by the sword. So the whole concept of displaying his remains, it has no relevance to that. But it's Kiles Elokim Toli. So there's a Ramban here who explains, based on just the concept, that, there's a word from Rav Chaim Volozhiner, that we have an obligation, b'tzedek tishmar misecha, that we have an obligation to give our fellows the benefit of the doubt. That if you see something which is questionable, there's a positive commandment, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt. So he explains why. Why is it so important to give a person the benefit of doubt? If it's a 50-50 call, did he do the wrong thing? Did he not do the wrong thing? You're not permitted to see him in a negative light. You have to give him the benefit of doubt. And the Chofetz Chaim cites the Rabbeinu Yonah that even if it leans more to the negative, although you have no obligation to give him the benefit of doubt, but nevertheless, you should not judge him negatively. You should not, unless you know definitely he did the wrong thing, not to judge him negatively. So Rav Chaim Volozhin, Rav Yisrael Slantik says something interesting. If society has a breakdown in morals and ethics, morally and ethically, they become corrupted. And you have your standard. If you're exposed long enough to their values, ultimately, you're going to erode. You're going to deteriorate because you're exposed to the standards of society. Because we as human beings were affected. If people don't respect one another's existence, one another's possessions, over time, you will become desensitized and you will also assume similar processes, the way you process things, the way society processes it. So let's say a person would not have an obligation to give a person the benefit of the doubt. And you see a person's behavior and you suspect it to be a thief. So that means you see that person, he's a thief. That's the way we judge him. So if wherever you turn, people are seen in terms of behavior that the behavior is negative. What kind of society are you living in? You end up living in a corrupted society. If you live in a corrupted society, what happens to you? You become affected negatively. All your standards are automatically undermined. So therefore the Torah says, unless you know definitely that they did the wrong thing, you should give them the benefit of the doubt. As a result of that, you see the standard of society is maintained, and therefore you're able to maintain your own society, your own standard. Otherwise, your own standard will be compromised due to the influences of society. This is Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. So the Ramban says a person deserves to be put to death. The most extreme level of penalty, stoning. And now it becomes public knowledge that a person did the wrong thing. How does it become? Because his remains are being displayed. Because only a person who's liable for the stoning, his remains are displayed. If people are aware that people are put to death, that means people transgress this area. Once it becomes, like certain things are unheard of, people, they will see it as an area which those are lines you don't cross. Because in our society, we don't cross those lines. But if you see people crossing those lines, automatically it causes that area to be compromised. And you don't see it as clear and as vivid, and therefore one is not as careful and you cross those lines. As a result of that, although you have to display his remains, but don't leave them there too long beyond sundown, because if people see it, that representation automatically will compromise people's standards. That's the Ramban. Okay? That's the kikilas el kim toli. Because ultimately, since the person, not with the midrash, sees that this area was breached, you see it long enough and you expose it long enough, automatically the area becomes breached for the standard of society. That's the Ramban. So they say, Maharshiv Zecharin Baruch used to say, we find, the Gemara, we just had this, that there's a mitzvah to set up cities of refuge in Eretz Yisrael. Cities of refuge. And there's a mitzvah, there were 6 cities of refuge, 3 in Eretz Yisrael, 3 on the Transjordan side. That if a person killed inadvertently, there was an obligation to put up signposts directing the inadvertent killer to give him direction how to flee to the city of refuge. And they were like arrows on the road, city of refuge, so many miles. So why? So the simple understanding is because the Gol Adam, the avenger of the blood, if he should catch that murderer outside the city of refuge, he has a right to kill him. So they should be able to flee as quickly as possible. The city of refuge, you have the signposts directing him to the city of refuge. Okay? However, Fa'aliyas HaRegel, there's a mitzvah that 3 times a year a Jew has to go to the Temple Mount, as it says, to see the presence of our Master Hashem. There were no signposts directing to Yerushalayim how to get to Yerushalayim. So the question is why? For the city of refuge, there were signposts to get you as quickly as possible, as we explained. Because since it was a question of life and death, it was essential you should have that signpost to flee as quickly as possible. But others say this: a person kills inadvertently. So if he has to get to the city of refuge, what does he do? He starts knocking on doors and says, "Excuse me, where's the city of refuge?" So that means it becomes known in the community that somebody was killed, that a Jew was killed, because somebody is knocking on doors asking how to get to the sea of refuge. Hashem says, if such a tragedy takes place, that a Jew takes the life of another Jew, even inadvertently, he's fleeing there because he needs kapara, he needs atonement. As a result of that, we want to put this we want to sweep it under the carpet. We don't want people to become aware of it. So therefore, taking a Jewish life, it's something unheard of. Therefore, Jewish life becomes sacred. It's seen, that doesn't happen. But when it comes to do a mitzvah, you're going to Yerushalayim, to the Temple Mount 3 times a year, and you want to know how to get to Yerushalayim, Hashem says, I want you to knock on all the doors. Knock on all the doors. How do I go do the mitzvah? People should be aware that people are doing mitzvahs. We're all going to Yerushalayim. It creates a certain gusto or a fervent feeling that Jews are going to do mitzvahs. Therefore, there were no signposts telling Jews how to get to Yerushalayim, but regarding the Seder Refuge, there was. So what's the punchline? When did my Rishiva say this? Rav Aaron Kotler, Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha, came to the United States in 1941. And he started the Lakewood Yeshiva. It didn't start in Lakewood. It originally started in White Plains, New York. It was a stone's throw from Jericho. Mark, you hear that one? Stone's throw, okay. And they were both on Long Island. White Plains and Jericho. And he was the first cousin of my Rishiva, so he comes to Baltimore. And Rav Aaron Kotler, even in 41, was one of the greatest Torah sages at that time. And he stayed at my Rishiva's house for 6 weeks. And he would take him every night from home to home, trying to raise money for Lakewood Yeshiva. Literally. He raised quarters and dimes and dollars. That's it. Very, very sparse. Literal, a pittance. So, and then there was a representative of the JTS, of the conservative movement, had a fundraiser in Baltimore. They raised in one night $25,000. So the patrons of the yeshiva said to my Rishiva, they esteemed, they revered, they say, see, Rabbi, we value Torah, we esteem it, but you realize it's not for the American shores. One night, conservative Judaism raises $25,000. Here you have this great Torah sage, and he's raising nickels and dimes for 6 weeks. So Rishiva explained, when a person like Rav Aaron Kotler comes to the United States, Hashem wants, do you know what Torah is? Let him go knock on doors, and every person should see what a Godel Torah is, what a Torah sage is. If he raised 25,000 one night, how many people would be exposed to his presence? Very few. But now that he has to go and meet endless people to put together a small amount of money, so how many people are being exposed to his presence? Unlimited numbers of people. As a result of that, that's like going knocking on doors. How do I get to Yerushalayim? But the person who represents something which is negative, let him succeed in one night and let him go back to where he came from. But you know who said this? The Chofetz Chaim, originally Rav Eli Lapyan, who was a Talmud of the Alta of Kelm, of Reb Simcha Zissel Ziv. When he left Kelm, originally Rav Eli Lapyan was known as the ultimate Mashgiach par excellence. He was a person at the age of 27 who had Gilui Eliyahu. Eliyahu Navi came to him, was known, holy man, but originally he was a Rosh Yeshiva. And what was his understanding of being a Rosh Yeshiva, leading Yeshiva? Every day he'd be involved, disseminating Torah, students, mentoring students. He realized when he established the Yeshiva, he'd be out fundraising most of the time. Every Shabbos, he'd be in some village, some town, giving, speaking publicly, and raising money. So rather than being occupied with students, he became a fundraiser, a glorified fundraiser. So he went to the Chofetz Chaim. So the Chofetz Chaim said to him, you don't understand. If you wouldn't have difficulty raising money, and you wouldn't go to all these villages, all these Jews who live in these far-flung off areas, would they ever see a person like you? They would never see a holy person like you. So therefore, the way Hashem, providence, sets it out to raise money for Torah, it's not easy. Because Hashem wants that not only you should disseminate Torah, and mentor students, that as many Jews who could be exposed to this kind of person, Hashem wants them to be exposed. Therefore, regardless of what your aspirations may be, but you have to go and you have to put yourself out there that people should see who you are and what you represent, because that will make a difference.